Let's talk about this more now with the director of the UK Interchanging Europe, Professor Anand Menon. Hello to you, Professor Menon. So the fourth round of talks have come to an end with no resolution in sight. Should we be surprised?
I don't think so, no. I mean, there was never, I don't think, any prospect this week that there would be a great breakthrough, partly because the positions of the two sides are quite entrenched, partly too because I think ultimately to unlock these talks you need direction from the top. You need prime ministers and presidents to take control of this and to allow trade-offs. And at the moment, of course, across Europe, including here, prime ministers and presidents have got other things on their mind, notably the pandemic.
Yeah, and Michel Barnier talked about that lack of face-to-face contact and the hope that would be changed soon. What is the next stage?
Well, David Frost did likewise, and I think at the moment what they're going to do is try and figure out a way of perhaps meeting in person, because I think both sides share this sort of understanding that doing these things by teleconference isn't ideal. The next formal stage is at some point in June, the Prime Minister will meet the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. They will do a stock take of the Brexit process. Judging by what was said today, no one's going to flounce out of these talks. Both sides have agreed that they need to keep talking, and so the talks will continue. But I think one of the interesting things about Barnier's intervention was just that very marked sense of irritation about him today. He's clearly losing his patience and is slightly irked with what he sees as backsliding by the British over commitments they've already made.
Yeah, he went through 4 concrete examples, didn't he, of what Boris Johnson had agreed to uphold, but we are very far from this objective. He went through each one by one. In all areas, he said, the UK continues to backtrack. Meanwhile, what is the position of the UK from David Frost?
Well, the UK's position is that the political declaration, as opposed to withdrawal agreement, which is an international treaty that has been ratified, the political declaration is simply a guideline. It's not legally binding, and it's perfectly fair for either side to say, actually, we don't want to do it like that. We want to do it slightly differently. The EU's position, as we heard today, is different. This is the only basis for the negotiations. One side's going to have to give some ground at some point. Otherwise, there really is going to be no agreement.
Yeah, and where is there any likelihood of ground being given? This level playing field is a real sticking point, isn't it?
Yeah, level playing field and, remarkably enough, fish. On level playing field, I think what you might see is the British government is happy to promise that we won't go below EU standards. What they're not happy about is being bound by anything that even whiffs remotely of the European Union's court. But you can imagine measures there like the European Union saying, OK, if we think your standards have gone below what we want, we will take punitive action in other areas of trade, but our court has no formal role. On fish, again, even though it's very political and both sides are entrenched, you could see just about space for an agreement if the Brits agree to give access to our waters to European fishing fleets in return for, say, an annual decision by our parliament to allow this to continue. So the British government can claim that we've taken back control. Europeans can continue to fish in our waters. But both sides have to want a deal and want to show flexibility for us to get there.
Given where we are in the process, Professor Menon, what are the odds on a deal being agreed before December the 31st? Or actually, as Michel Barnier said, it needs to be agreed by the autumn.
I still think a deal is more likely than no deal, simply because even though both sides are willing to live with no deal, they would both really prefer to have a deal signed. It's going to be hard. There's no doubt about that. There's lots of hard work for both sides over the summer in negotiating the details of this. I think no deal is a perfectly possible outcome, but I still think something will be agreed in the autumn and they will rush through ratification if they need to. That being said, what is agreed looks increasingly like it's going to be rather thin in nature and not cover large amounts of the trade that now exists between the UK and the EU.
Michel Barnier repeating again today that the EU 27 were open to the idea of an extension of 1 to 2 years to continue those negotiations. That there's no chance of that being countenanced by the Boris Johnson government, is there?
As things stand at the moment, absolutely not. I think this government takes what it says on Brexit very seriously. They have committed to not extending a transition. They said so in their manifesto. They've legislated to make it difficult for us to extend transition. I see no prospect of this government changing its mind on that. Whether or not the two sides can find a way of effectively extending transition when it gets to the autumn, if they're running out of time, without using this mechanism, remains to be seen. But I think that'll be very hard to do.
Professor Anand Menon, thank you very much indeed.